Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Yes, great. Okay, so basically we're going to be talking about social media activism tonight. And I created a hashtag for us. You don't have to tweet or Instagram or whatever during the session, but if anything comes up that is inspiring to you or you feel like you do want to tweet, you can use our hashtag FoRA Activism. And that way you can kind of share the messages of the things that we learn during the session with the outside world. Because I know some people aren't able to make it, but hopefully they could watch the recording or look through the tweets or Instagram posts or whatever it might be, but no pressure to do that if you just want to listen. And a few housekeeping things too. So we have live transcripts on. So if any of you are interested in looking at the live transcripts, you can do that as well. You can use the hand raising function at any time if you want to ask a question or just bring my attention to something. It would be great if you can mute yourselves for when I'm speaking, but there will be participation during the workshop. It's really meant to be a workshop as opposed to like a lecture. And so we'll be talking at different points, and you can feel free to leave your camera on or off throughout the session, whatever feels the most comfortable for you. Okay. So let's see. So for me, in terms of just a short introduction of who I am, so my name is Pau Fangel, but I go by Pau. If you are on Twitter, I'm Cubby Pau, and so that's my Twitter handle. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Some of you have your pronouns in your name. That's great. If you want to, you can add them. If not, that's totally okay too. And this session is being brought to you by the Friends of Random Acts New York City group. I'm part of the leadership team for that group. So those are just some takeaways in terms of who I am and getting to know me a little bit, as well as the Friends of Random Acts group. And we'll make sure to give you our information at the end so that you can follow us on social media if you're not doing that already, though I have a suspicion that you all are already. So session goals. So I came up with 3 goals for our session today so that we make sure that we are all on the same page and kind of get something out of it that we all feel comfortable with and feel like we can have some takeaways together. And so the first session goal, and I'd say it's the one we're going to focus a little bit more on, is to start to develop common concepts and language to meaningfully participate in conversations around understanding social media activism. Our second goal is to reflect on best practices for social media activism. And our third goal is to workshop a potential activism together. And so we'll be doing that at the end. So these are our 3 goals for the session. Group agreements. And so I'm not going to go through all of these in depth, but I just wanted to put some things out there for us so that we can make sure that we have some things to consider when we are having discussion with each other. And so use I statements. So making sure that you're speaking from a point of view of just yourself as opposed to an entire group. So for example, you could say something like, I agree with what you just said, but you wouldn't say like, we all agree with what you just said, because you're only going to be speaking for yourself. And that's especially true when you think about social identities. So I would, for example, not say like Latinas feel X, Y, and Z. I would say like, I feel X, Y, and Z. And so that is something that is really important just in terms of having conversations with each other. You can ask questions. Confidentiality, we want to maintain it to a degree. We are recording, and so I want to make sure that you all know that anything that's mentioned here could potentially be seen by other people afterwards through our recording. And so it's important that we are mindful of confidentiality, but at the same time, we also are aware that it could be seen by others in the future. Experiment with new ideas and hold multiple truths. Practice active listening. Lean into discomfort. acknowledge the liveliness of language. So what that means is that basically language, especially when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, is often changing. And we try to give people the benefit of the doubt in terms of the language that they're using. It could potentially shift quite often, and terms could become outdated. For example, I just did a workshop in which we talked about the term minority being outdated, and some people didn't know that. And so the liveliness of language when it comes to a lot of these different topics is important to consider. And then respond to your body. What that means is basically if you need to step away or anything of that nature, we're not going to be having high risk conversations. So I don't expect there to be a lot of triggers or anything of that nature. But if you do feel like you need to step away or turn off your camera or go on mute or not participate, we definitely feel comfortable with you doing that. So terminology, I wanted to start here. And so there's 3 key terms that I wanted to mention for all of us. And basically they're the title of our program for tonight. And so social media activism and social media activism. So social media, most of you will probably know what that is. It's really important to note that even if you kind of are aware of all the social media platforms, that you remember that it's something that allows people to socialize online. And so oftentimes people do it in a variety of different capacities, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, Pinterest. There are so many different options, but it's a term to use to describe the variety of web-based platforms, specifically that enable people to socially interact with one another online. Activism is the policy or action of using vigorous campaigning to bring about political or social change. There were different definitions I looked at, and I settled on this one, and I debated it a little bit because of the word vigorous, right? Especially when you're thinking about social media activism. And so I think it's important to kind of consider the fact that activism does have that vigorousness to it, and social media activism might or might not, depending on what it looks like. And so that's really what we want to focus on. So social media activism, as you can see, is the 3rd term that we have there. And it's the use of web-based platforms, applications, and technologies to bring about political or social change. Sometimes we don't consider some things like blogs or wikis and other things of that nature that also can contribute to social media activism, but all of them do. And so this is our terminology in terms of what the terms are themselves. Does anybody have any questions about any of these? Okay, I think they're pretty straightforward. Okay, so what are the key components of best practices for social media activism? So we call these the 3 A's. And so when you're doing a social media campaign or activism, there are 3 different aspects of things that you should consider. The first one is awareness, the second one is action, and the third one is accountability. And so what awareness means is basically that's education. And so that has to do with bringing up different things on your social media platforms that educate others. And so that can be anything from sharing a statistic to sharing an article to sharing a personal experience or a personal story to bring awareness to an issue in which you want to have social change. And so that's what awareness is. Action is when you're actually asking or perpetuating some form of action with your social media activism. And so what that can be like would be like asking people to vote, making a script so that people can make calls about a certain issue to their political members of Congress. We're all in the United States, so safe saying that. But basically, it means that you're actually taking action. You're talking about marches, you're talking about different things that people can do in order to actually make change beyond just education. And so that's one aspect of the 3A's action. And then the third part is accountability. And so accountability is actually how you measure whether or not your campaign is successful. And so, for example, how many hashtags were used, how many people showed up to an event, how many people voted, how many people contacted their member of Congress through a specific means. And so those are some of the best practices for social media activism. Does anybody have any questions? We're going to delve deeper into this, but this is kind of the overview. Okay. So, and then just a reminder that our hashtag is at the bottom if you do want to mention any of this. So I borrowed this from Pew Research, and which basically they did a survey of about 4,000 people. I wanted to share some social media activism statistics. And so basically, what they found out was really interesting, I think. It was about, I think I mentioned 4,000-ish people, and they found out that around 36% said that they participated in some form of social activism. They used platforms like Facebook or Twitter in the past month to post a picture, show their support for a cause, look up information about rallies or protests happening in their area. That was 35%. Encouraging others to take action on issues they regarded as important was 32%. And 18% reported using a hashtag related to a political or social issue media during this time. And this is from 2020. Which I think is also important to note. And if you look at the chart on the left side, there's some really interesting statistics. What you see is that white people are the least likely to be active on social media in terms of social media activism. Black people are the ones who are actually the ones who are most likely to be active. And I don't love the term Hispanic, but Latinx or Latina or Latina people are the ones who are kind of in between the two. You can look at the age range difference there, and it goes up significantly the younger that you are. And so 34% of those age 18 to 29 said that they participated in activism, whereas only 8% of those over 65, and then you kind of have everything, or you have in between 30 to 49 and 50 to 64. But the numbers are actually pretty low once you get outside of the 18 to 29 age range. And so I think that that's also something that's really interesting to know. And then they also put a question about whether or not you're Republican or Democrat in terms of your leaning politically. And what you can see there is that 10% of the people who were Republican leaning used hashtags related to a political issue, whereas 25% of those who are Democratic leaning did. And you can see, so that's the column all the way on the right, but you can see the other categories that they asked about, whether it's posting a picture, looking for information about rallies or protesting, or encouraging others to take action. So I thought this was really interesting, especially in terms of the different social identities and how they break into different categories. And so I don't know if anybody has any thoughts or questions on any of this. I'll give you a second to just take it in, because I know it's a lot of text. Okay, so I think it was interesting. Or Nicole, were you going to say something? Sorry.
I was just going to say that I'm not surprised by the results. This is what I would guess.
Mm-hmm. What specifically, like age and race and
more with the age and whether they lean Republican or Democrat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense to me too, also with like different movements, like the Black Lives Matter movement was very prominent, especially in 2020. And so it makes sense to me that more Black folks were the ones who were engaging in social media activism. And I think that that is also common in terms of political, like voting and other issues. So you can see some sort of alignment there as well. Any other questions or thoughts?
I just had one query, Pau. So
Yeah.
you mentioned ever-changing language, and I noticed that, you said that the term Hispanic, right? You prefer using Latino, Latinx. And I was also reading that Latinx is also considered offensive by some people. So is there
Yeah.
any prescribed right term when it comes to mentioning this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so some people are also using the term Latin with an E at the end. And so that is something that's kind of catching on. And I haven't heard that Latinx is offensive as much as not preferred, but I do think that there are some circles in which it's considered offensive. For those of you that don't know, the reason that the X is used is because it's gender neutral. And so it allows for conversations around different topics without assigning a gender to the person or the topic that you're talking about when you're looking at an entire group of people. So I don't know if that's really not an answer to your question, Purna. I'd love to hear if Bex has thoughts, but no pressure, Bex. But I think that I still use the term Latinx. I also use the term Latina for myself and feel very comfortable doing that and don't feel like it's wrong to. And I know that Latina is something that, and people pronounce it different ways too, but it's something that I would also feel comfortable using. I just haven't kind of gone in that direction yet myself.
Yeah, I think it serves as a great umbrella term, but that not everybody, if not everybody is necessarily comfortable with it because of pronunciation issues, language concerns, the idea that it might erase a more specific identity, like if you identify as Mexican or Puerto Rican or something like that. So some people might choose not to use it, but when we're kind of lumping everybody together, like all the whites, all the blacks, all the, and your chart here says Hispanic, but all the Latinx or Latine, whatever it is, that it is a good umbrella term that helps us understand that we are going beyond the binary.
Yeah, does that help or not? The reason I asked Bex, because you don't know this, but Bex, do you want to give a little bit of your background?
Yeah, hi. I actually am a professor in the Black and Latino Studies department at Brute College. So I do work with this a bit and do a lot of research. We actually just had a panel, I don't know if it's recorded, I'll see if I can find it, about this term. And we had a few people come on it and speak to like the pros and cons of the term Latinx. So yeah, I'm just a professor in the field, that's all.
Thanks.
Thank you both. That really helps.
Thanks, Purna, for that question. Yeah, so any other thoughts before I move on to the next slide? Okay. So different considerations before we jump into like actual conversation and doing group work together. So things that are out there that are important for different people to consider is that, like, for some people, even this topic would be like social media activism that's a joke. Like a lot of people see it as performative activism, or there is even a term slacktivism for it, or armchair activism. And so it's important to kind of be aware that that's out there. And some people like actively choose not to participate in it because they don't see it as a legitimate form of activism. I'm not one of those people. I do see it as a legitimate form. I'm doing this presentation, for example. I wouldn't be if I didn't believe in it. But I think it's something that's important to consider. Disability justice, social media activism, especially during 2020, there was a lot of conversations around how social media activism and disability justice intersect. And basically the idea that social media activism is activism, because a lot of people who have disabilities, for example, may or may not be able to participate in other more traditional forms of activism, like marching, and things of that nature. And it depends on a whole spectrum of different reasons. Being quarantined, for example, really prevented a lot of people from being able to participate in that as well. But it wasn't just quarantine, it also has to do with different physical disabilities, different disabilities in terms of like pain, chronic pain, things of that nature, even just having enough spoons to participate in something that requires that type of commitment. And so I think that's also important to kind of consider. Misinformation, that could be an entire presentation, or like 20. But basically misinformation is a huge topic, which we aren't really going to get into, but there's a lot of misinformation that's connected to social activism on different platforms as well. Facebook has come under fire for having a lot of misinformation on their platform around things like the vaccine, for example, and election results and different things. So misinformation is something that's important. Whenever you're doing social media activism, I always recommend that people really think about the information that they're retweeting or putting out there, sharing in their stories, or, you know, doing on TikTok or whatever it might be, because you should really research it, make sure that you feel like it's sound information and something that you believe in. It's hard because of the political climate. Oftentimes it's so polarized that the misinformation really becomes ingrained in different political conversations and it becomes truth to people. And so it's hard to kind of disprove it when it really becomes just the truth for different political considerations. And so misinformation is something for you to just always remember is out there, and consider when you're participating in social media activism. Trolls. So the main message here, and if you research this topic, and there's a lot of great articles out on social media activism in academic journals and books, and actually our newsletter that we put out for Random Acts, our Friends of Random Acts New York City this month, has a whole section on different resources that you can read on this topic. But don't feed the trolls is the main message across all of that research. I have not seen just even one aspect, one person say that, you know, engaging with them is a good idea, but that's different than debate, I think. And I think there's like a fine line there, because some people are really in it to just troll, whereas some people really want to engage in genuine conversations around difference. And so knowing what that line is for you and kind of knowing those boundaries becomes something that you have to kind of navigate on your own to a degree. I know that I've debated with people I disagree with online, and I think that there's pros and cons to it. You know, like you can engage in those conversations and learn about difference, and people can see different points of view and challenge, and you can challenge what people might be saying that you think is incorrect, and they can do the same, and it could be healthy debate. But then there's a line that could also be crossed in which it becomes not healthy debate. And so those are some of the things to also consider. Any thoughts or anything that you're kind of like, oh, this is a huge consideration that I think we're missing out on here?
No, but speaking to the debate issue, I think one of my concerns with engaging in people into debate is that I may reach a point where I don't have the answers anymore. And so it comes across, or it gets maybe misrepresented as, well, she doesn't know what, like, everything she said before must be incorrect because she doesn't have anything to like follow up with or whatever. And so I think that's one of my hesitancies with engaging in debate sometimes. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think that's really legitimate. And I've been there where that has happened to me, where I engage in a debate and then I kind of reach a point in which I don't know what to say anymore, or don't consider my area of expertise or just my general knowledge to be enough to kind of provide. I think in those situations, it's complicated, right? Because it depends on the person. If you think that they're coming into it with goodwill and all sorts of things that you have to consider. But if you've already considered all of those things and you feel like you've decided to engage in the debate and you reach that point, I try to just be really honest. And I try to say something to the effect of like, we've reached a point in which I don't know exactly what the next aspect of this debate is, but everything I said prior to this, I feel like I was very knowledgeable about, or something of that nature. I don't know if that's the perfect answer, but I still generally choose to engage in the debate if I have the spoons. That's the biggest thing for me. If I feel like they're going to be somebody that takes it in a at least respectful direction. But at the end of the day, I think it's like one of those things where if you don't know if that person is going to do that, or if you think that they'll kind of do a like gotcha moment, if you can't continue on with the conversation, then I understand the notion of not wanting to engage. Yeah. Trinity, were you going to say something?
Yeah, for me, like the performative activism and slacktivism, and whether or not, social media activism is really worth it. Like for me, I do have disabilities. I do have things that keep me from going out. And I started 2020 doing almost nothing. Then I got involved with social media activism, and it just kept growing from there. And now I'm working with random acts, doing different things in the real world. I mean, it can really turn into something. And so I think that it is something that's important that we shouldn't just take for granted.
Yeah, totally. I agree with you. I am not in the school of thought that it is slacktivism for sure. I definitely believe that it is true activism, and I've seen things really change. I was gonna do a whole slide about like different movements that have happened through social media activism, everything from like Oscars So White, about the the Oscar awards, to Black Lives Matter, which is like more serious beyond just representation, to like Not Your Asian Sidekick. There's like so many across the board with different identities and different topics. And I agree with you, Trinity, that it can become so important and snowball into something that's really significant. All right, anything else in terms of considerations? All right, so discussion. So this is meant to be all of us, and we aren't going to do small groups, so both sides that are coming up will be all of us. But these are just some questions, and they all kind of go together. And so the first question is, what are some best practices you've seen in social media activism? The second question is, what components did these practices have, like awareness, action, accountability, the A's that we talked about? And then the third question is, what platforms did you see this action on? I'm going to be really honest about TikTok. I don't have TikTok, and it's been like a huge platform for activism. So I just want to call myself out that I'm not going to be able to speak a ton to TikTok. Some of you might be able to. I know that they just had a huge amount of activism when it came to the Texas abortion law that passed, and a lot of TikTok users coming together to prevent that form that basically existed for people to like tell on those that were taking people to get abortions, or those who got abortions. They flooded it with different I don't even know what to call it. What they just flooded it basically with different information that wasn't true in order to bring that form down. And that all started on TikTok. And I know it was really powerful. But most of the activism that I'm most familiar with is on Twitter and Instagram. But yeah, so like I just wanted to put that out there in terms of the spirit of full disclosure. But what are some of the best practices you all have seen in social media activism?
I think when people include links to outside information, it's very helpful, because I'm not one to just take something I read on Twitter at face value. I want to know a little bit more. So if I can know where someone got their ideas from, or what they're drawing from when they're trying to engage in activism, then I can sort of get a better idea of, okay, am I on the same page with this person? Am I, trusting the sources that they're using? Am I going to need to dig into other sources? So I appreciate it when I see links included. I don't know if that's what you're looking for there, but.
Yeah, totally. I think that's like a big part of the first awareness and like education. And I know that I tend to try to put down articles or statistics or different things of that nature to help with that. But I think it's like the foundation of activism is awareness. It's kind of like the first step, because you have to do the education part in order to ask the people to do the next part, whatever the action is. And so, yeah, I really agree with you, Bex. What about others? Are there examples you all can think of some best practices you've seen in social media activism?
I'm not sure if this is one, but it's kind of similar. But like if somebody asks a question, or like under a comment section on Twitter or something, under a tweet, and then, there's some people who troll on them, but then there's other people who just like give the information and give the, like, kind of educate them in a way, instead of just like piling on with the trolls.
Yeah. No, I think that's like a really good point. When you have like, when you know people are gonna read things, like for example, some of you know Misha Collins, and I know when he tweets a lot of things around politics, and sometimes I feel like the background information could be greater, so the awareness part can be greater. So I know in the past I've seen people, and I've done it myself, include like an article so it explains what he tweeted, or include like, a link to what he's talking about or whatever it might be, so that it expands that out so that people can kind of make or take that action beyond just whatever it might be, like a fundraiser or something of that nature, which we didn't even talk about fundraising, but that's another form of activism that I think is like kind of in its own sphere, and it depends on what the fundraiser is, but it can definitely be form of activism. I know a lot of members of Congress fundraise through social media, and things of social media mainly, and email and things of that nature. But yeah.
So is that separate from action, would you say?
Fundraising?
Yeah.
I think that is action. I think that you usually have the awareness, like who is the candidate, and then you have the action, like fundraise for that candidate if you support them. And then the accountability would be like, how much money did we raise? Did this work? Those would be kind of the 3 steps there. But yeah, I think it kind of just depends on what it is. Like if it's something connected to a cause or social movement, or things of that nature, like the Legal Defense Fund for the NAACP, or Black Lives Matter, or whatever it might be, versus like a GoFundMe or something of that nature. So I think there's like a difference there. But yeah, other thoughts or ideas of best practices you've seen in social media activism?
For me, the things I engage with most are things like this, where somebody comes on, and whether Instagram Live, something Zoom or whatever, and they talk to us, they engage with us. It's how I've learned most of the things that I've learned over the last couple of years, and I'm far more likely to engage in that than even link to an article or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's great. And I think that happens a lot on Instagram. There's like a lot of like Instagram lives, there's like stories that have video components. It happens on TikTok too, I know. But basically where they're giving you a lesson or education, that awareness piece becomes really important. I know that I've been really interested in like anti-fat bias action and like looking at that specifically. And I've learned the majority of what I've learned through Instagram. And so I know that that is really true for me too. And I do Zooms as well, a lot around like disability justice or different like lessons that you can engage in, I think in person or not in person, online, in person, I don't know what to call it. This I think can be really special too, to just have those conversations and make those connections and meet different people who are like-minded too. Yeah. Okay. So the last thing I wanted us to do, which was supposed to be in small groups, but I'll let you all vote. Do you want it to be all 6 of us, or do you want me to put us in groups of 2 groups of 3? How about all 6 of us? Raise your hand. Yeah, okay, so we'll stay all 6 of us. So create your own social media activism campaign. And so it literally can be made up like anything that we are interested in. And so the important things to consider is like who initiates the campaign, what issue are you trying to bring awareness to? So that's the first A. What action do you want to see? Will there be a hashtag? That's always an important question. And then how will you know your campaign has succeeded? So accountability. So is there any issue that you all feel really strongly about or just care about even a little bit?
I feel like it's very difficult to choose. I don't know. There's a lot of things that come to mind. I mean, how broad or how narrow do we want to? Because like for me, something like LGBTQIA plus support in some way, but I don't know exactly what are we looking, how specific we want to get within that.
Yeah. So I mean, like, let's say we did do something that was LGBTQIA plus. I think being specific is important. So for example, like, and this is all make believe. So it's just so we go through the motions, right? To see like, we're not necessarily going to do this after this. It's just so that we can see the actual action of going through the motions of it. But like, it's like by Visibility Week right now. So
okay,
for
yeah, good example.
that's like something we can talk about. It's like who initiated it. And so I've seen different organizations come together and initiate it together. And I would say as well as individuals. And so I think the who is like GLAAD, the Gay and Lesbian, what is it? Alliance Against Defamation. I've seen the Human Rights Campaign tweet about it. And I've seen like the Bisexual Resource Group tweet about it. And I've seen another bisexual group, I don't remember off the top of my head. And then I've seen a ton of individual people. So like who initiated the campaign? I would say those organizations did, to really bring awareness to the fact that it is Bi Visibility Week this week. And then what issues are you trying to bring awareness to? So what do you all think are some of the issues they're bringing awareness to?
Well, the idea that like, I mean, when we talk about bisexual erasure, it's like, oh, you're with someone of this presenting gender, then you are straight or you're gay. You don't get to be both, and sort of accusations of, you know, oh, you just want to be with everyone, or, you know, whatever it is. So trying to bring awareness to the fact that bisexual people are real.
Yeah.
First of all, they do exist, and that their sexuality is just as valid as any other sexuality, I guess.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, it's like literally the visibility, right? And so I've seen 100% what Bex has seen, like challenging myths is what I would call it around bisexuality. And so that's something that I've seen. I've seen things around bi-representation. And so literally articles on like how many bisexual characters are in different TV shows and like in different books and things of that nature. I've seen things on mental health and bisexual identities in connection to mental health and statistics around that. And so I think it's like a whole wide range of things, like everything that Bex mentioned, just those other things to things I'm probably not even thinking about. Trinity, were you going to say something? Sorry.
No, I think she kind of covered most of what I was thinking, so.
Yeah. And so like what action do you want to see? So that's like, you know, I think that that's a good question for this one, because I think there's a lot around awareness and I don't necessarily always see the action component to it, and it doesn't have to exist. It can just be an education campaign. But I think that, you know, I haven't thought about it a ton. Like there could definitely be fundraising for bisexual organizations or organizations that focus on bisexuality. I know that the mental health statistics that I saw were specifically around how bisexual individuals sometimes face more depression. It was specifically around depression that I saw. And so experience more depression. So I think something around that could potentially exist. I don't know if you all have any thoughts on any actions that could be taken.
I was thinking like an action to try to get more media representation in whether it's TV shows or movies or just in general books.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like good representation that challenges the stereotypes that like Bex was talking about.
Could you do something in terms of action in that regard if you're talking about on social media, as in tagging creators of television shows or books or that sort of thing about like, hey, we want to see more of this? Is that
Yeah, I love that.
all under action?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea for action. I think
And something that's not necessarily financially oriented, because that's not always an option for everyone.
Exactly. And that's like the tricky part about fundraising when we were talking about it earlier, that it's not always inclusive and it can be classist and, you know, just a lot of things. If that's the only option, it can really be tricky. So yeah, I think those are all examples of good action. Is there a hashtag? I think there is. I forget what it is. I used it because I consider myself part of that community. I think it's like Bi Visibility Week or something like that.
I just put in Bi VI to start it, and it came up with Bi Visibility Day, Bi Visibility, and Bi Visibility Month.
There you go. So I think that that's like a good point, actually. Like whoever is initiating the campaign, like there's like a day, a week, a month, and like all sorts of hashtags. And I think like there's a lot of power behind like getting a hashtag and making sure that like you stick to it and that you really like, you know, drive that message home. And so I think that I the one I saw was by Visibility Week, I think is the one I used. So it wasn't even any of those. And then how will you know if your campaign has succeeded?
I think with social media, it's difficult to judge, who has read it and how far it's gone. But it's more, many of these things are around changing mindsets of people. So it will be difficult to quantify the impact. But if you've made even a minor mindset change or made people more curious, or even kind of fuel them to probably do their own research, I think that is a success.
Yeah, I agree with you, Purna.
There might be, depending on how successful it is, you might be able to find things in like trending or whatever, but it would have to be pretty big to reach that point, right? And I think Tumblr does, like, I know they do like some sort of weekly recap of like top terms or whatever. I haven't been on Tumblr in a few years, but I know that was something that they did before anyway. It was like they released a lot of their statistics. But again, I feel like that works really well for very large campaigns. It might not work so well for a more local campaign. I don't know.
Yeah, I think like looking at the metrics for like how many times the hashtag was used, things of that nature, I think are good points. I think it is hard to quantify in social media more than any other type of activism I can think of. I think Purna, you're right. Like when it comes to like new people looking into something because they see a hashtag, or new people's minds being expanded or whatever it might be. I think that is harder to kind of quantify. And yeah, I think that the accountability part with this specific campaign is a little bit hard.
Maybe you get lucky and someone that was on another side of the argument to begin with starts posting in support, and then you've succeeded.
Yeah,
I think that's very rare, though. I don't know.
It is. Yeah, I think it is rare.
I was also thinking in terms of like for accountability, or like how the campaign succeeded, if we were talking about like back to like, for example, like the representation on a TV show. Like if I would say like if there was a petition, like the online petitions, and the creator saw it and responded to it, of like, we'll try to do that, we're working on, or like something like that.
Yeah, I think that's great, Nicole. I think you're right. I think that it's like sometimes I forget that it can be literally like a one-to-one thing where a creator can say like, oh, I saw this, I hear you. Like I feel like there are examples of that. And
yeah. I was thinking of like with Lin-Manuel Miranda and Afro Latinx representation in the Heights, and him saying, yes, I see this, yes, I understand, but we won't know if it succeeded until like he's proven a side of accountability in his next work, kind of thing. I think, like, yes, we were successful in getting him to see this and understand the issue, but now we still need to follow through before it's fully reach success.
Yeah, it seems like with social media, it's almost like a two-part of one, it has to be seen, and then the second part is that actually happening.
Yeah, totally. All right, Yolanda. So just going back to our goal, so start to develop common concepts and language. So hopefully you did, in terms of knowing the definitions of different things, and we had conversation around different considerations and disability justice, activism, etc. Reflect on best practices. I think we definitely did that, and then workshop a potential activism together. And so those were our 3 goals for today. And that's it. So does anybody, we have just a few more minutes left, around 5 minutes. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts that come to mind around this topic in general? Any thoughts around like something you wished you saw or something you learned from this experience, or just anything really?
I like the idea that, you know, social media activism can start small or seem like it's small when it gets started. But I think, Trinity, you mentioned this idea that like starting out with being at home and like only being able to do activism online led you to more external or greater, wider spreading activisms. And so I think to just downplay it as not useful is harmful to any cause. You know, yes, you need to be cautious and you need to be aware when you are posting, but, or I guess I do, excuse me, that I don't mean to put that on anyone else in particular, but if I'm taking that time to say, you know, this is step one for me, and now let me see where else I can take it, that's really a beneficial thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's definitely true. It can like snowball. Like we didn't get into it, but like Oscar's So White, it started as like a small hashtag, you know, it's just literally people who tweet, and we didn't talk about influencers, but you know, that is a thing in terms of social media, and then like an influencer will pick it up and then it will like snowball into something bigger and bigger and bigger, and like I genuinely think the Oscars have been impacted by that. And so that's one aspect of like representation and activism, but I think it happens with so many things. And it's so like, this is such a random thing, but like I just Googled my handle, Cubby Pau, on Twitter. And like a lot of the things that I've said are actually in articles and like random things, my tweets for activism, which I had no idea. But around like Black Lives Matter or the George Floyd verdict and just different things of that nature. And so I think that like it can have a ripple effect beyond like what you even know.
You mean you looked for it outside of Twitter, like you just looked at how it was used in external sources, external articles and such?
Yeah, and Google. I just Googled myself, but instead of myself, my handle.
Got it.
Yeah.
No, that's great, because that's, I don't know if it's necessarily counted as a like any specific success, but knowing that your voice reaches a further audience is cool.
Yeah. All right, you all. So just 2 minutes left. Any final thoughts?
Well, one thing that's coming to my mind is, you know, we're all in America, but not all countries have the opportunities that we do to get together in person and do all these things. And we've seen social media activism change other countries and just really light fires in them that were incredible. That probably would never have happened without this type of activism. And so, again, the power of it is amazing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's like literally like huge things that have happened because of social media in places like Colombia, or like, you know, the Arab Spring and like different things of that nature, where around the world social media brought awareness to things that were happening, different injustices and things of that nature, and really perpetuated the movement. So yeah, I think that that's a really good point, Trinity. We can, like I said, have like an entire session on like global social media activism. All right, you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Pau.
Okay, you all. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.